Hello, my name is Will Liegel, and I'm a teacher here at Phil-Mont Christian Academy. It is the art room of our high school that you see kind of behind us here. It's a little messier than usual, it's a little emptier than usual because it's the middle of June and the students are gone. They've gone for the summer to do whatever they're going to do. They've taken their artworks with them to post around their own homes, and the supplies are just about ready to be put away. But not everything or everybody is gone, because in the background here you see two of my friends, Matt Stemler, who was our high school art teacher. He's an alumnus and he's been here forever, it seems. And then our newbie, who's just joined us this year, Becky Suggs, who is our elementary and middle school art teacher. They've agreed to come and speak with me and to enter a conversation about the whole idea of art in a Christian school. We started just about 2 months ago with some of these interviews with faculty. We began with Dan Kunkel, who's our Bible teacher. And of course, that's a good place to start at a Christian school. What's our philosophy of teaching the Bible? Well, at Phil-Mont, every class is Bible, it said. And so how does the Bible influence things like history or mathematics or science, or in this case, art? So we're going to dialogue for a little while. Hopefully we'll ask the questions that you want the answers to, and hopefully you'll enjoy our time with Becky and Matt. Thanks. As I said, we'd be here with Becky and Matt, and this is them right now, and I've got a lot of questions. But the big thing is, who are these people? I mean, you've got to kind of know who they are before you want to listen to them. So I've given them a couple questions in advance, but they're going to be speaking from the hip, and we're going to start by finding out who they are. So, Matt Stemler,
yes.
Tell us a little bit about yourself and how you come to be at Phil-Mont and how you come to be here in art.
Well, I come to be here at Phil-Mont because I've been here for a very long time. I was here from K to 12, graduated in 1989. From there, I went into art school. I went to design school first, mainly because it was just a direction that I followed. I didn't really have interest in many other things, and I found that in design school was a place where I could really sort of grow and learn skills and really communicate. It was a short design school, and then from there I decided to look a little bit more into art and really pursue fine arts. So I went into Tyler School of Art. As I finished Tyler School of Art, I was asked to do some subbing. The teacher at the time was leaving because of pregnancy, and from there I took over as high school teacher for the arts.
So you went from Phil-Mont, 12 years of Phil-Mont, to Tyler School of Art.
Correct.
Big difference?
Huge difference. I think in art school it has its own sort of particular challenges. I think that when you deal with, I'll say it this way, I was prepared with the skills of art, and I was prepared in understanding what the Christian worldview was because of Phil-Mont, but there wasn't really a crossover when I left Phil-Mont. And when I went to school to Tyler, I really felt those challenges on a daily basis. I felt that I had a double major all the time. It wasn't just that I was an artist, but I was also a Christian. So those things were constantly mixing up. God was a real blessing in my life. Every class that I went to, I had another Christian artist there, and I was amazed by that. And I really look back on that and saw how God used that as a way of continuing and strengthening my faith. And so when I started teaching, I vowed that I would never let my kids encounter the same type of struggles. Of course, they'll deal with the artistic struggles, but this idea of Christian worldview and the arts, I really wanted to provide an environment for them to learn, actually have those conversations here at Phil-Mont.
And you mentioned your kids, so tell us a little about your family. Your wife's an alumnus too, correct?
My wife is an alumnus. The story is I didn't really know much about her. She didn't like me at all. We have about 3 years difference. And then after, a couple years after Phil-Mont, we sort of re-met. She was taking a friend to school, to Tyler, and I was there. And we met and we married. I have 2 boys. One is going to be a high schooler next year, and I have one entering in middle school.
Great.
So,
Great.
yeah.
Okay, thanks a lot. And Becky, now it's your turn to tell us a little about yourself. Now you're brand new to Phil-Mont this
That's right.
year, so tell us a little bit about your background, your training, your family, and all that.
Sure. So I, different than Matt, I went to public school, K through 12, and at the end, my senior year, decided that I really wanted to find a Christian college to go to. So I wanted the support of Christian environment, didn't really even consider an all-art school because I wasn't feeling that I was ready for that environment at that time. So I chose to go to Calvin College, and I majored in art and in art education. So I have a sculpture degree, Bachelor of Fine Arts in that, and then I have a BA in art education, K through 12. So I was certified in Michigan to teach, and I decided to move to Pittsburgh, and then I taught there at some museums, some after-school programs, public school, a variety, and decided I wanted to keep going to, then I moved to Boston, and I got married like a year after that, and my husband and I decided both to go to school. I was teaching there for a little while, so we both went into graduate school programs, and I thought by that point I had our oldest child. I thought that'll be great, no problem, I'll go to school, he's a baby, and by the end of my graduate school program, I had all three of our children, and the youngest was in a sling walking across the graduation podium with him there. So he made his way. Everyone knew I was the one with all the kids. So and then I went to that program was an all art school. That was Massachusetts College of Art and Design. So my master's in art education from there, and that was a great. It was the right time for me to be at an all art school. I really loved it. Absolutely loved my graduate school program. And I wasn't teaching full time then. I was really being a mom and being a student. So when my husband graduated from his program the same year I graduated from mine, we came to Philadelphia. And, I did a lot of volunteer work. I did some camps, some library programs, different things like that, and was kind of waiting on the Lord to have the right opportunity for me to go back to teaching and the right timing. And so I had started my search, and really it was kind of just God's way. I had actually been told about a different Christian school position, and I had gotten all my things together and applied, and it wasn't a good match. It wasn't a good match for my family, but actually they had no sculpture at that school, and I do sculpture. So I was like, well, sorry. It's like everything in my portfolio. Oh, there's another sculpture, and they were like, we don't have any sculpture, and it just didn't feel like the right spot. But then I came and looked on Phil-Mont's website, knowing that we lived close and we'd always been encountering alumni who just raved about the school and the community, and it was kind of the desire of our hearts to be able to be connected. Well, there happened to be an opening, and God had His way from there.
So you have 3 kids?
I have 3 children. I have a 9-year-old, a 7-year-old, and a 5-year-old.
Right. And all 5 of your kids, between the 2 of you, are all here at Phil-Mont.
That's
right. Yay, that's great. Now, it's interesting how different your journeys are, because you were Christian school, public school, then your public school, Christian school. But both of you have worked out there in the world too, because you worked at museums. And I know, Matt, you've had a number of art shows throughout the Philadelphia area. How has it been interacting with what you've been trained with professionals out there in the art world? Who wants to go first?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Well, I think I guess I want to sort of talk a couple of different scopes. One with being an artist, a practicing artist, and then as maybe a teacher. And I think there are challenges out there as far as being a Christian artist, but the culture is really interesting, and especially for the Philadelphia culture of art. I'm sure it's the same with many other kinds of things, but it's just a small community, and they are really encouraging in one way or another. I've been blessed to have been in a few major shows, one being at Eastern State Penitentiary, and just very welcomed with the ideas. In fact, the piece that I made for that, although I add my own sort of spiritual end to it in Christian worldview. It's interesting that they as a community accepted the piece and really called it their own little sanctuary. So in one way or another, the form or the intention of that came out. And just working in the community at Philadelphia, a recent show in the fall that I had with an installation, and really encountering a lot of people with a lot of questions, and just really being open to thinking about the artwork and its intention. And well, one of the great things is that the artwork really creates a conversation. I mean, the piece is the piece, and one of my philosophies about art is that once you sort of let go of that, it's its own thing. It has to survive on its own. You can do a little bit of writing around it, but it can't be a crutch. So to use art as a way of creating conversation with people and their lives, I mean, that's something I think that I really view being an artist as being missional in that sort of way.
Interesting, because you're bringing your excellence in art out there into the world, and then it's got to stand on its own and initiate conversation. Great.
Right.
How about your museum work? Was that difficult to do based on your Calvin work?
It was an awesome opportunity because you could go right behind the scenes. You could take your students right up to the artwork, create things right there in the museum, which is an ideal situation. Now often we're finding prints and we're like, do you have this print or do you have a copy? Can we show? I mean, we'll project things from online, from art museums, but how great to actually experience a piece, especially a three-dimensional piece, and look at it and walk around it and then create something. So that was awesome. I think my worldview, I don't really think I was set apart. There was a few awkward times when there was an international show, and it was at the Carnegie Museum in Pittsburgh. And there were some subjects that were brought up. And that is always an interesting way. How do you engage with that? Is there validity to what the artist is saying, who's coming up with some really harsh, there's a lot of issues of just racism and things like that were very overt in the pieces, and how do we engage and have a conversation and trying to find the right time. I had a group that was just young, and the parents were really concerned with one particular group that it was not something that they could visually understand or have the knowledge to appreciate the piece. So then you kind of, okay, we'll not do that. That's not the right one for us. So I think there's a timing and a right age for certain things. And that's something that I think we're always trying to, especially now. I find with my kids that I'm teaching, the students I'm working with, and the internet, and they're looking at images all day long and trying to teach them discernment and wisdom about what they're seeing, and bringing context to what was made. I just had a student who made a piece that was we made pieces that look like Andy Warhol's work, of a print of a face, and there's multiple colors in the background. We said, well, you can just do that on your phone. That's no big deal. And I said, you don't understand. You couldn't just do that before on your phone or on your laptop. This is this is someone who was the first. It wasn't, you need to understand the history of what happened and why was he interesting, and his relationship with graphic design, and that he really revolutionized where things were going in pop art. So there's so much more, just that they need to understand the context of what they're doing and what's happening around them. Why would someone make an app about that? Why is that even cool?
I would add to that just this idea of, because you're talking about form and how form has evolved in art, especially contemporary art, and just as thinking about dealing with the spiritual end. I mean, if you ask artists out there, a lot of what they do, they will connect to their own spiritual viewpoint.
Right.
And of course, we connect what we do to our own spiritual viewpoint, and it's that's where that conversation comes into play. Well, my form is really talking about my vision, and that's connected to spirituality too.
I think if you articulate that well, and I think if you are solid in your craftsmanship, then most other artists respect that in the community. That's what I found. If you come across and you try to, haphazardly, you take 2 seconds, it looks like you just threw it up there, and then you say, well, this deep, I feel like this, I don't know. You just come with some deep thinking, oh, it means, and people are like, I don't see the quality, So really, I think when you're able to show that you're thoughtful, that you're considerate, and then even if they don't agree with you, but you articulate your beliefs well, I think most people are very respectful of that.
They are. I think
Yeah.
respect is the right word for that.
Well, we've gotten to know about your families and your background, and even have begun to get into some of your theories on why this is all worthwhile. So, I put my kids at Phil-Mont. I had kids graduate from Phil-Mont, and, I want them to get a good job and to have a happy life and all that. Is art really necessary for them to dabble in while they're here, or to think about when they get out of here? I mean, why, with all the needs that there are in this world, would art become something that we should care about?
There's a lot of different ways to answer that question for sure. Most recently, I heard a good answer to that question. I'll just sort of pick from that. When we think about the struggles that we face, and we think about what it means to be a human being, it's the arts that really search for the answers for that. And of course, we aim to search through the scriptures, and we have an understanding about our relationship with God. But we do have to deal with our end of it. Who are we in sort of relation to God? What has He done for us? Why are we even worth saving? Really, what it comes down to. So this idea of value in expression. Although arts and although the math and sciences have, in a sense, defined our culture in the way where we can grow with technology and explore.
Mm-hmm.
We do learn a lot about ourselves. We do learn a lot about God's creation. Just even the question of what does it mean to be made in the image of God really comes into this. I was at a course that had to do with that was teaching me how to be an AP teacher. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
It was an instruction course, and at one point in that, it was a few days long. I was having lunch with public school teachers, and they were going around, and it was kind of like take your turn to complain. They were going from one teacher to the next, talking about how their school was cutting budget, was cutting personnel, was cutting supplies and time and all that stuff. And it came my turn, and I was quiet, and I said, well, our school believes that the arts are just as important as any other thing that we teach, because that all comes from God's creativity, and we're made in God's image. And they just were astounded. No one challenged me about it. I said, so we are fully supported in the arts at Phil-Mont here.
There's no doubt, we talked about this, that art embodies the reasons that we are interested in technology. So it talks about beauty, and it talks about value, and it talks about all those kinds of things. And it's the same. You're dealing with much younger kids. Your kids are, some of them, 5 years old,
Right.
and your kids are 15 to 18. Same kind of dialogues going on there?
I think so. The premise is the same. We're reflecting God's creativity, and there's something natural in every civilization. There's not one civilization you can find that hasn't created. So why is that? We look back and say, well, God was creative and is creative, and so that's just part of who we are. And how do we use that then to give God glory and reflect God's glory? That's always a challenge. Sometimes kids will come up with an idea, and I say, well, is that going to be honoring and pleasing to the Lord? Your idea. And that's kind of our, I guess you would say, like the gold standard. That's really where it comes from. It's not, is that just what you want to, or is that just how you're feeling? That's really the world's perspective. You just make art that just expresses whatever you feel. And I think there's a lot of danger in that, and you can see it in the art that's created. That there's things you look around and you kind of like, it's not that we can't make challenging work that questions something that happened or that's a response to an experience, but at the end there needs to be a way that you have ultimately, I guess, I don't know, how do you say it, Matt? Like it needs to just also be edifying to the Lord. There has to be something redemptive about it, because we don't live in a world that is just sorrowful. We're living in a time that we know we are redeemed and the Lord has a plan for us. Ultimately that needs to come through. So
Even with this idea of expression, of course we always read the Psalms, and when you read through them, there's so many Psalms that really are based on David's cry out to the Lord expressively. and yet it's done in a poetic form. And so
Right.
just the way God is glorified through the art is this additional step. It's not just complain. It's if you have to make that switch over to, well, let's give this a form. Let's give this a poetic form. Let's make this make sense. And even in that decision, you're in a sense allowing other people to join in with you. Yeah.
It's interesting because I've seen a lot of the art that's produced here. My classroom's right down the hall from yours. And one of the things that impresses me about even our youngest students is that this isn't a craft class. I mean, a lot of art for young people has been reduced to popsicle sticks, if you would. But I look at the art history that you do and the amazingly advanced things that even our elementary students are doing. And you know, how do you kind of figure out what to do with second, third graders that brings them to that point? I mean, how do you do that? Give us a sample of kind of a lesson that takes them into some cool art.
Well, one of the things I have to say is that kudos goes to what was done before me. Really, I came into a great situation where the teacher before me, she did an exceptional job with creating a curriculum, and then I've just kind of been able to enhance it. So I'm not going to say that's all mine. You know,
but you're continuing it.
I'm
right?
continuing it, and so I think that a lot of that is just when I took the position. Matt would speak to me, we really have high standards here. That is part of I heard it, and I heard it, I got the message. But just the idea is they can do a lot more than just a craft project. And, so part of it is knowing developmentally, where are the kids at?
Mm-hmm.
You need to know that what is possible, what are limitations for certain ages, and what are things that they can expand and start to understand conceptually. So I feel like I came into a great situation as far as that. And, like third grade did these Viking ships. And that was really fun because we got a chance to, we go throughout the timeline. So we start at kindergarten, first grade, start in cave paintings, and they go as close to modern art, as close to current trends in art as we can. And so it's a, quick years through, and they go back and they do it again through first grade, changing the projects, but getting that same idea of understanding how art's changed over time. And then in second grade, we start to focus on more kind of like for 1850s to current time, and then it goes back, third grade goes back to kind of ancient to, anyway, that's the way it's been done. So it's an interesting to watch how it builds on itself, the program, as they go down, and they start to really understand, oh yeah, I've learned about this before, or I'm learning something about it in class that's related. And so when third grade got to do their Viking ships, they were so excited about that. It seems to just fit right into that age of just things that they're interested in. They loved looking at actual ships as much as we could. We got to see part of a movie of someone who's remade a ship, current, in the last 10 years has made their own ship, based off of Viking designs. And then they got to make one tweaked a little bit. But it's like a Viking ship, but it's a Viking ship with their interests a little. So and it's just neat to see what are they learning? They're learning about the function of the ship, what was there, where did the people sit? There are all these other components that go to it. And I'm just amazed at the variety that comes out, because you think, oh, it's all gonna. That was always my fear. When I was learning to teach elementary school. Oh, it's all gonna look the same, and it doesn't. And they just all come up with so many different ideas. They play off each other. There's just such variety in what ends up being made, which is always exciting. So trying to give them a chance to explore.
What you're laying out here, I mean, this idea of you're a first grade going through art history. I've taken art classes on the high school and college level, and my courses were not as developed as that. A lot of it was, here's a piece of paper, have fun. But you seem to give a lot of support, structure, direction, history. It's really an academic course, if you would, in many ways. So when she hands them off to you, how do our kids compare with, these big schools that have, 27 art classes and they offer photography majors and all that? How do our kids compare with the world?
Well, they do well. We do have a few competitions that we're involved with, but there is an expectation of craftsmanship. But if we're just sort of thinking about comparing what our school does and maybe even public school, I think one of the things is that, of course, technique's going to be very similar. and materials and things like that. But my view is more post material. What I mean by that is that I'm interested in the students having an idea of the content of their work driving the media. We've always known that different media has different feel, and so as much as I'm interested in the vocabulary of the students, as much as I'm interested in their understanding of composition and how to express through organizing their ideas, just this idea of well, what really am I trying to put in as far as meaning and idea, and how that sort of is expanded, but they have a better choice instead of just being dictated by pencil, or we're all going to do pencil now, we're all going to do charcoal now. It's more about what are we after, really.
So you mentioned about AP earlier,
Mm-hmm.
that you're an AP art teacher here at school. And do kids go from Phil-Mont into art-related fields?
They do. I'll say that proportionally, we probably have about the same amount of kids going into fields as a public school would, or any other Christian school, which is usually a small amount. There's not a lot of kids who are going to pursue that. However, on the other end, we have a really high percentage of students taking AP art and level 4 art. They get into it, and at Phil-Mont, we have a couple of years in which is required, yet I still have a whole slew of kids taking four years of art, and even just the highest level taking AP, and it's challenged too.
Yeah, so that's a much higher percentage than most schools. And I think too, you've created people who, although they may not go into art careers, understand art. It's kind of like in English, you want to turn people into lifelong readers.
Right.
Well, you're creating people who will probably go to museums and will understand art
Right.
and be able to look at a magazine and see it differently than people from another school.
Right.
But
You also have photo club and you have other things.
We have a lot of things going on here. The room is the art room always has somebody in it for sure.
no doubt about it. And your room is down the hall, and you actually run through 9 grades, I guess. 10 grades.
I have 9.
Yeah, you don't do preschool.
Not preschool yet.
Okay, not yet. In the very beginning, I asked you about the dilemmas you encounter when you get out there and you interact with the greater world of art, or going from Christian school to public school and vice versa. What issues do you think are difficult for your students to deal with as you're dealing with the greater world of art here in school, and you're looking at great artists, they're looking at what great artists have said about their work? What kind of things trip your kids sometimes, and you have to walk them through or help them to understand a little better?
Well, I think since we often talk about art history and artists, I think one of the things that you delve into is artists' lives. And really, I ask a couple questions. One is, how does the artist prioritize their lives? There are artists who live for their families, and they'll speak about that. They'll speak about the influence. There are other artists you could tell have a real disconnect. Their art is their thing, and there's not much around them besides their art. So I think this idea of their priorities. Another thing that I talk to the kids about is after we've sort of looked at artwork, even thinking about their own, a parallel between the two worlds is this idea of revealing truth. I think it's a challenge to ask the students, what has your work revealed? And I think that, for me, is a way of just pushing that conversation continually. Because there are kids who will want to hold back. I mean, when a student is making any kind of artwork, they're going to be vulnerable, and I think asking them to make a piece about themselves, I mean, really even just asking about any subject, reveals their position, pulls them out, exposes them quite a bit. And so when we look at artists that are professionals, that's what their job is. They are constantly delving in themselves, trying to ask themselves questions about their own truth. Sometimes that's ugly. And I think as we sort of debate, well, now that it's out there, well, how do we deal with this?
Mm-hmm.
Even recently taking some kids through an art criticism piece of Toulouse-Lautrec, and how he showed sort of a brothel scene,
Mm-hmm.
okay, but the painting itself really reveals the simple nature of that. He wasn't hiding any punches.
Mm-hmm.
This is what I'm living with. This is what society looks
Mm-hmm.
like.
Mm-hmm.
And so just really trying to have kids open up that conversation.
Mm-hmm.
So.
With of course, films, television,
Mm-hmm.
even magazines, things are very different than when I was a kid.
Mm-hmm.
So they're up against that all the time.
Mm-hmm.
So this is not new news, but you're giving them information of how to deal with that,
Right.
and how to interpret, how to react to what they're seeing out there, whether they're creating art or just looking at art.
And also discernment. I mean, really not. I don't think everything that's called art is worthy of you looking at or engaging with. That's just kind of how I feel. Definitely, of course, with the younger kids, there's a certain time where you need to that's not the right time for you.
Right.
And as you get older, there's certain artists who I would really say, I can't think of one off the top of my head right now, but there's certain times when I've gone into a show and I said, really, this is not helping me in any way to continue to be involved in responding to this work.
Mm-hmm.
And I think sometimes you need to teach your students that that's an appropriate response.
Yeah,
That just because someone else tells you,
Mhm.
no, well, this is what you can say, okay, that's great, but for me, I choose to disengage from this right now.
Mhm.
You know what I mean? And I think that's something that really takes a lot of empowerment, especially as you become a young adult and you're trying to find your way, and just being able to say, you know what, not everything is really.
Well, Dan Kunkel in his film and media
Right.
things, I mean, he basically reminds students that there are probably certain films that you begin to watch and you're aware 10 minutes into it, it's time to leave the theater because it's not going to be helpful for you, that perhaps their view of what truth is so radically different than yours that it could really be injurious to you.
Right.
And I think that you probably enter some of those things with art as well.
But kind of thinking along these lines and thinking back to one of your questions earlier about dealing with students and their artwork, appropriate, not. As I said, it's the idea of getting them to really look at things truthfully, getting them to understand what is honoring to God, and having them sort of grapple with those things, and add to that this idea of what can we reform. I mean, when we're saved, we're not just instantly taken away. We're left here. Christ prayed for that. Keep my believers here. And so that really makes us have to think about, okay, there's a restoration process that has to begin, and dealing with contemporary art in a Christian worldview. There's a lot of restoration, but there's a lot of good in forms that comes about. And one of the things I'm really pleased with, sort of raising the bar of what we teach here with the students, is the students don't deal with cliche symbols. They don't deal with the normal sort of teenage angst. The subject matter that I see our students grappling with is very different than a public school. I don't give honor just to expression itself.
Right.
Okay, expression has to come from somewhere, has to go somewhere. And so one of the things that I think makes teaching in a Christian worldview particular is this idea of, okay, well, you just express something, I'll just take that as it is. And I'm not afraid of what my students bring out. We've dealt with, my high schools, I've dealt with a lot of really deep issues, but put them in a way that is appropriate. And so the students don't dwell on, okay, well, I've seen this type of depressing drawing. I'm going to deal with just blues and greens, and that's the way I'm going to go. It's always a matter of challenging them again. Okay, well, that's nonsense. I've seen that before. Let's see something more from you. And this idea of creating vision of their own is really important. And it really does shape. It's not too often I have to go around and really push a kid out of a stereotypical situation. They already know that they shouldn't have it down, and they need to delve deeper on the onset. So
Great. every teacher's got their things that they say over and over again. They know they need to remind students of, whether I'm doing that in English or, I'll do it in theater, face the audience, speak up, pronounce clearly, those are things that I need to keep reminding the students of in my field. But there's got to be some things that, you find yourself saying repeatedly to help keep your students going in the direction you want them to go. Any ideas? What are some of the mantras of art here? Don't run with scissors, I guess.
That's definitely one. Don't run with scissors. I definitely think a lot of it's encouraging the students to take it to the next level. Sometimes they're just willing to be happy with it. That we call it in stages or phases. We're trying to come up with the right terminology for us so that we can pass the kid. When I pass the kids on to math, that they're already hearing these same words. But usually, the students will finish a work, hand it to you, and be like, "I'm done." And then you have to kind of say, well, what about, then you ask questions and you question them and say, what about this? And did you think about that? And, maybe why did you do this? And have a dialogue. And then there's the next phase. They kind of have a chance to kind of rework it. And so it's often a kind of just a questioning process of, well, how about this? It seems a lot of and it's not a directive that you have to do my idea. I'm just sharing an idea. And I say to them, that's my idea. You can run with that, or you can come up with something else, but it needs to be taken to the next level. Your thinking was I see where you're going with it, and now I want you to continue that. So definitely in middle school, that's part of the process that we have going on a lot of the time. And even with elementary students, I have students, just trying to encourage them, just to not be satisfied with the bare minimum, because I think there's a few of us in life who
Absolutely.
can.
Oh, sure. All of us, yeah.
Get kind of like, well, I did the assignment, you know what I mean? And you're like, yes, but I see in you that you can do more. And a lot of it's just giving your students, having a vision for your students. We talk about that a lot. Of seeing, I see you going here, and that's my goal for you, is to get up here. And so let me help you get there. And that's, that could be in art and also as people. That's our I think that's what we see here a lot.
Well, I've seen that reflected in comments of visitors, because you guys do your bulletin boards and you'll have an elementary or middle school, high school bulletin board. And people who don't know us come in and say, is this an art school? This is incredible work, and there's so much of it, and it's so right out in the front, that you're so proud of this work. And so whenever you're pushing the next level, it's working, it's really working. What are some of the mantras in the high school?
I'll give you a couple of mantras. One is that you may have the greatest idea in the world, but if you haven't composed it well, nobody cares. And the other one is craftsmanship really convinces people of your intention. So just sort of taking both ends of that spectrum and really pushing them with craftsmanship and with again, the idea of pushing it. My older students, it's interesting when sometimes the older students will come into my classroom, they'll be younger students, and as you were saying, a younger student will say, "Oh, I'm done, Mr. Stemler," and the older student will be like, "You shouldn't have said that." But I do want to talk a little bit about the Christian worldview of sort of a mantra that I give, and I'm always pushing the idea of fulfillment. And at different points in their development, I'll hit it in different ways, but really just overarching, what we do as artists is part of the creation song. I mean, this started at creation, and God's designed us in His image, and we're now just picking up at this particular point, and we have a job to do, and that is to continue to fill the earth, whether that be sort of restoring things, or whether that be making things that are new that we've never seen before. We're part of this larger picture of fulfillment. God's earth is dynamic, and we're creatively a part of that dynamic.
Great. Well, I can picture already a lot of our students who don't go into art, selecting beautiful pieces for their own home, or thinking about design of their home, or anything that it might be. Because I just see them, they have these art eyes now. They just they love to look at stuff. They love to evaluate and critique each other's work. Okay.
Right.
Anything else? You want to kind of think of a capper in here on anything?
Well, I think one of the questions I had seen was this idea of, well, what like out of a student, what like after they've gone through the work of Becky and work of myself, elementary, like what are we doing with them?
Sure.
You know, and sort of, I know that they're not all going to go into the arts, and you know, so for some of the kids, this sort of graduating from Phil-Mont in the arts, it's kind of their zenith. You know, people look back and they think, oh, what did I accomplish in high school? I'm never going to touch that again.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm thankful I deal with seniors, so I can push them as far as maybe they'll ever go in their life.
Mm-hmm.
For others, they have this idea of moving on to art school.
Mm-hmm.
So their portfolio becomes like a key.
Mm-hmm.
You know, their portfolio becomes a scholarship, becomes a certain placement in class, and they move on and on and on, and they've been captured in that way. Although I have a lot of examples of this, I often think of one of my students that was not necessarily art-centered. She was more of a sports-centered person, and I had her for 2 or 3 years, and just working with her, and just giving vocabulary, showing things, giving her vision. And one day she came in and talked to me about buildings she saw downtown, and she said, "No, Mrs. Stemler, I saw buildings." And she started talking to me about negative spaces, about angles, about colors, things, and my calm reply was, "Welcome to the other side." Even this year, one of my students was really working in photography, and she was showing me her work. Required summer work, and we were talking about compositions, and they were good, but there was something missing. And over the course of this year, just working with her, creating this idea of vision. How are you showing us yourself through this? How can somebody else see you through this? And then at the end of the year, the work was just unbelievable, almost unsettling.
Mm-hmm.
And she needed one more piece for her portfolio. And she pulled out one of the old ones. She was holding that next to the old one, or a new one. And I said, "Well, what's the difference?" And she looked at me. She said, "That one has no vision." It was fulfilling to see that.
Very good.
That's where they need to be.
Well, it's rare that, Phil-Mont has a gift in that we have kids here preschool through 12th grade. That's something the Lord did a couple years ago
Mm-hmm.
here. And I watch now a continuum, we all do, that we never could see before.
Mm-hmm.
Where kids move naturally from elementary to
Mm-hmm.
middle school to high school, and we see them looking at the work ahead of them, whether it's in theater or
Mm-hmm.
music or
Right.
art.
Right.
And I think that it's increasing what you're getting at the other end,
Mhm.
because these kids always want to be at the next level.
Right.
There's a
Right.
bunch of 9th graders coming in next year that were your students this year,
That's right.
who are more than ready to
Mhm.
jump in here and move further and faster. So,
And they know who you are, and they have even come down a couple times
That's
and
right.
asked some questions, and they're very excited,
yeah.
Right.
which is it's great to have a
Yeah.
handoff,
Yeah.
Absolutely.
for them.
Yeah.
So it's kind of cool. You started the conversation with this, is that in the public schools, they've denied the value
Mhm.
of art and the arts in general, and that's where they're cutting first.
Mhm.
And all the statistics say that kids in the arts do better in so many other
Mhm.
areas. But
Mhm.
here at Phil-Mont, we're not doing that. We're going the opposite way. If anything, we're being given a lot of encouragement to just
Absolutely.
keep on going.
Absolutely.
So this is who your students are going to be studying with if they come here. So I would send them here right away if I were you, so they can get started. How are they going to make their Viking ship in 3rd grade if you don't get them here in 1st grade and let them get their feet wet? Okay. And how are you going to get them an AP if they don't get here in middle school? All those kind of things. So I've been delighted to talk with these guys. I learned a lot today. Hopefully you learned something too. And we'll meet with other people in future times. But thank you very much for being with us. And praise God for your work here.